One of the reasons that I wanted to be a Native attorney was because I wanted to be one of the warriors, one of the Ogichida. In our culture, the Ogichida are the warriors. They're peaceful warriors that stand up for the people.
Every time I think about being a lawyer and why I went to law school, it always comes back to my earliest days with knowing a bunch of my relatives who were Indian people. Many of them didn't want to talk about it or denied that they were Indian. If they could pass for white, they would do that. They changed their last names. They refused to speak their language. Becoming a lawyer is just one of the things that I felt like I could do to help to remedy that.
Askibagash gigido indigenikas, waganakasing odawakwe, mashike indorum. I just introduced myself to you in my native language, and in English that translates to greenleaf talking, askibagash gigido, because when I speak for my people. I am an Indian woman from the land of the crooked tree, and I am a member of the Turtle Clan. And I'm very honored to serve my community as the Chief Judge of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians.
All rise.
My evolution personally as a judge is, I do think about justice as being sacred because of the gravity I feel as a Native person in the service that I perform in a Native community to try and help other Native people to live the kind of life that they ought to live, you know, as the Creator would have them live.
A lot of people think peacemaking is a soft way of getting out, when in fact, you have to tell the truth. It's harder.
The adversarial system is so focused on punishment, retribution, winners and losers. And the peacemaking system is focused on healing, on empathy, on relationships, and on addressing the underlying causes of what brings people to court.
Part of our interest in peacemaking had to do with our interest in using restorative justice practices and models to interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline.
Well, we have the highest incarceration rate in the world. 25% of the prisoners in the world are in United States prisons. Think about that. We have 3% of the population. There's something wrong with that system. There's something wrong with that society. So a restorative concept of justice is something we could learn a great deal from.
Indian communities make very hard decisions, and people who can understand kind of all of the effects of those decisions on the tribe itself, their relationship with their state government, their relationship with the federal government, their relationship with the community members, can really, I think, be invaluable to tribes, and that's what Native lawyers do.
Audrey Geyer has been a video director/producer for 25 years. Many of her programs have aired on PBS as well as been distributed to the educational markets and through community screening events. She is the founder and executive director of Visions, a nonprofit 501c3 independent video production organization located in Metro Detroit. Vision's mission is to produce compelling and unique social affairs documentaries that tell the stories of Midwest communities and cultures that are underrepresented in the media. Through their programs, they explore themes of social justice, human rights, and cross-cultural awareness, and aim to foster empathy, understanding, and dialogue, as well as inspire social change. Visions has produced 2 documentaries on contemporary Native American issues: Our Fires Still Burn, The Native American Experience, and Warrior Lawyers, Defenders of Sacred Justice. Geyer has a BA from the University of Michigan in Film and Video Studies and an MSW from New York University. Please welcome Audrey Geyer.
Thanks. Thank you for that. It's a pleasure to see all of you here tonight on a Thursday evening. This is pretty informal. This is a time where you can ask questions, and you can also give your own reactions to the themes in the film, or if you have had your own experiences related to the issues addressed in the film, please feel free to share those as well. So, would anybody like to start? Yes. Right. Yes, you know, I felt the same way. I didn't know anything about peacemaking, or particularly that it was going on here in Michigan and in Ann Arbor. It kind of, as I was delving into more and more of the work that the Native American attorneys and judges did, it, you know, kind of came into my radar, and I was, you know, pleased that I could include it. You know, I don't know. Well, Judge Petoskey has been involved, I think he said since 1991 as a state court judge in Ann Arbor. So, sometime since then, he started the peacemaking court in Washtenaw County. And I believe that one of the major impetuses for that was his relationship with Judge Petoskey, who we saw interviewed in the documentary. He learned all about peacemaking from him and the Native, community. It's flourishing in his court today. I happened to ask him recently how many other state courts have this in their systems, and he had told me that Arizona and New Mexico have it right now. I mean, I had hoped to hear that there were more of them. So it's still, it's still at its infancy in the state court system, but tiny steps can lead to bigger steps, hopefully. So, yeah.
We heard that they have a high values success rate after going through this process. Do we know what the overall scale of people that come in contact with it all?
Right, that's a really good question. I really don't know how large the percentage is I do know that Judge Petoskey and will present, if he feels him and his crew, him and his team feel that a particular case would benefit from peacemaking, he will present that to them as an option. And then they have to, decide upon, themselves, and the parties have to decide, are they willing to do that? Do they want to do that? It's, voluntary. And otherwise they would go the normal judicial route, the typical way that it's judged. So unfortunately, I don't know the number of cases that get brought to, are brought into that avenue, but I get the feeling that it's used quite extensively there. I mean, it's a prominent part of their particular state court system. I mean, Judge Petoskey's written articles. He's really, he really favors this. So I think, I think that there's a significant group of cases that go through peacemaking. So I mean, and the fact that it's successful is, of course, so important to see that it's actually working. It's not just an ideal, somewhere out there in the ether. It's actually something that works and they have great success with. Yes? Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I had done one other documentary on Native issues, Our Fires Still Burn, the Native American Experience. It came out in 2013. So that was my first documentary on the topics and the issues, and I knew I wanted to do my, the next one on those issues, some, issues related to that community here in Michigan, because I felt that even after doing that first one, I still knew so little, and there was still so much to explore. I felt like I just kind of, started, what is it, the icing, the top of the, what? Yes, the top of the, exactly, tip of the iceberg. So, okay, so given that, my process is that I kind of, I start to look around, I start to ask around, and fortunately, a board member at the time from the Kellogg Foundation, who had actually supported Our Fires Still Burn some with funding, he suggested I connect to the Volcker Foundation. And the Volcker Foundation, I'm not sure if you gathered that from, the documentary, because I didn't focus on them that much, but they actually, they're Michigan-based, and they offer a Native American scholarship program for, indigenous people who want to go into law school. So they help with, a grant. I mean, they're not large grants, but, when you're trying to cobble together money to go to law school, every bit helps. So that's the first beginning stage, is that he introduced me to the Volcker Foundation, and they were excited to speak with me. There was a couple people in the documentary, the white guys, who actually were the board members and the president of the Volcker Foundation. And so they were thrilled about it, and they then reached out to some of their Native American attorneys that had already graduated or on their board or were in the process of going through law school. And luckily, enough of them wanted to participate. I mean, that's always the big challenge, especially I'm non-Native, so I'm coming, outside the community on top of it. I think it was helpful that I had another documentary on the issues, and that it had been well received. But I'm not in that community, and so there's always, as a filmmaker, I'm always trying to make bridges, and usually how that's done is having people who value my work or know me and trust me that are connected in some way to the Native community to introduce me. And then to see what their responses are. And so that's how that happened. And then it was a long process of trying to sort out, well, what topics am I going to focus on? I mean, there's so many angles you can go. I mean, at first I was thinking, well, maybe I'll look at education and how there's not, it's still, Native Americans still don't go to, it's still a challenge for a lot of them to go and finish their undergraduate program, let alone go on and get their master's and their law degree. So I thought, well, maybe I'll look at that. What are the barriers to that? What is the status of that? And then it just seemed like that was too narrow, and I don't know, the more I talked to the lawyers and the judges, and they introduced me to more, colleagues, it just seemed like this was the way to go. And then I just kind of delve into it and come up with, a long set of questions, and take it from there, and then edit it, edit 40 hours of footage down to 1 hour. So there's always this, you kind of have to be somewhat open to uncertainty and spontaneity and the unknowns when you're doing this kind of work, so which can be challenging at times. So that's kind of my process, and filmmakers have their own, each filmmaker can have their own different process, but that's how I tend to work. Anybody else want to? Yep. The peacemaking idea? Well, they work with, first off, I would say they work with nonviolent offenders. And I think that a big determinant of what cases they choose to, offer this to or suggest this to is, are the people willing to go this route? Because you have to have kind of a certain value system and a certain, after it's explained to you, you have to have some, inkling, well, that this might work for me. I want to try something new. I want to try something different. I want to, so much of it's about, as they were saying, does this make sense to the people involved in it, the parties involved? Are they open enough to want to share their feelings and their experiences in a different way? And is the offender, do they want to make amends in a different kind of way? Do they want to come up with their own solutions? I think it's kind of, I think it's contrary to this punitive approach. You know what I mean? If you want to go into the court and you really want to get that person, you want them, to be punished, you want them to be condemned, quote unquote, you know what I mean? Just, it's a kind of a value system, it's a attitude, I think it would take a certain openness and way of thinking about things to take that route. And the lawyers, as we saw, the non-native lawyers would need to be involved as well with their client in that way. Yeah, I think that the fact that it works in Ann Arbor is probably understandable too. I mean, you have a more liberal population there, a more democratic population. That could be stereotypical to some degree, but I do think that is relevant. You know what I mean? That here it is happening in Ann Arbor. So yeah, I think that it's how you see the whole process, and if you're willing to try something different, and if you want more reconciliation, and not that the offender isn't held accountable. I mean, they are, and they make amends in a different way, and hopefully in a deeper way, that maybe it sticks in a different way, because they're kind of being honest about what happened in a different way than maybe going the other route. Is that helpful? Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else?
So I was really struck by everything and leaving the culture and spent a couple years with my
Oh, okay. Wow.
and it just was very apparent that the dog after the parents wanted to still stopping people from it's just to elevate the law. So at the same time, I feel like so inspired and grateful that there's all these personal disputes that get solved, like the community and things like that. It's
Right.
hard on me. What if the tribes would take the United States government to court, but then offer this system as an option instead of going through this system? That's me
Yeah.
just being a strategic thinker with
Right.
solution, and it's like really needed to actually create feeling on a massive scale. And I wonder if that ever came up or any thoughts like that as a conversation
Right. That's a really good point. There were some comments about just fundamentally how the Constitution was affected by Native American peoples at the time, or their values and their teachings and things. So there was a sense that there is that at a basic level fundamentally within our system. I think that, to expand it, outside of tribal communities more and outside of the few court systems, state court systems that are using it, will take almost like maybe a revolution or something. I think that it's so foreign in a way still, I think. I mean, maybe we can gravitate towards it. I'm not hopeless, but I think it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of voices. I think it's going to take because there's so much systemically in our typical system, I mean, the monies and the institutionalization of incarceration and the monies that come from the prison system and all kinds of things. I mean, even as the woman from the peacemaking, the Dispute Resolution Center in Ann Arbor spoke about, that we're starting, we're punishing kids at a younger and younger age, and there's this punitiveness that is kind of our value. And I think it's just going to take a lot of work, but I'm hopeful that Native Americans they're coming more to the forefront, I think, in our society. I mean, do you think so, given that you were involved? I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, that's my feeling from doing these 2 documentaries, that there's hope with some of that. I mean, just the fact that the boarding schools have come out in mainstream media in the last 6 months. Deb Haaland is the first Interior Secretary, first Native American Interior Secretary. I mean, there is some of that movement happening. The ice is being broken up some. I mean, what do you think, especially given that you've been involved in Native community?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really admired the
Right, right. Yeah. I know that some of the people I interviewed, like Judge Petoskey and Joanne Cook, they are very open and involved in trying to spread the word and to teach mainstream court systems and personnel about tribal peacemaking. So they are actively engaged in that, which I think is wonderful, and that's what it's going to take, is that the Native community is out there and spreading the word and teaching the mainstream court systems about it, teaching even individual lawyers. I mean, some of the non-Native lawyers that Judge Connors brought into his cases, the peacemaking cases, had no clue about it. But the more people individually get exposed, I think that offers a lot of hope, and is changing the system, step by step. I do, yeah. I think that's a big part of it. I mean, because the state court system. There's a state court in every county, like in Michigan, and for example, each state has these various state courts, and as Judge Connors was saying, and told me that New Mexico and Arizona have peacemaking incorporated into their state courts, and I know they reach out and try and talk about this with other state courts. So I think it's kind of like just trying to have those changes in each court, and affecting it at that level, as each, as more and more courts state courts, for example, can pick that up. I think it maybe it has a domino effect, so yeah, I think that it's systemic change like that. Yes, I think you're right, because it seems like from Judge Connors, so much of it is his impetus, and his designing that, his incorporating that, and his then teaching peacemakers, like the woman from the Michigan Dispute Center didn't know anything about that form of dispute resolution. She knew other forms, but not peacemaking, tribal peacemaking. Yep. Anybody else? I think I might. If not, I'll give you my information. Yes, go ahead.
I was just curious if the were aware of, other states doing a similar or the same process on the tribal level. Is that something that those tribes have incorporated into their own tribal courts, or is that just depending on the tribe and maybe even their public?
That's a great question. You know, I don't know exactly how many of the tribes have incorporated it, but I know when I would interview the attorneys that specifically work in the peacemaking, they said, you know, they've worked with other tribes in helping them incorporate it or, you know, bring it back alive. And certainly there are more tribes that are doing it than state courts, you know, and there's definitely that's more. There's more encouragement. You know, there's more to look at to be encouraged by that. But you know, the more tribes are doing it, the more they can then reach out to their own state courts. You know, I think it's you know, each little step in each tribe or each whatever, you know, each one is it helps, you know, kind of shuffle up what's happening and encourage more to be done. You know.
These other places in the world where this type of dispute resolution is also taking place, say, among tribes in Africa or in Asia or other places where similar approach has been taken with the same type of results?
Yeah, another great question. You know, I don't unfortunately know a lot about other indigenous tribes, other indigenous peoples. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised though, like for example, Canada, if that was happening in Canada, because there's a lot of similarities, you know, in Canada and the US. I mean, you see the boarding school issues in both countries. In fact, in some ways, Canada is farther ahead than us. You know, they have a Truth and Reconciliation, a commission that you know, was formed and took place around the boarding schools. There's been monetary compensation, I believe, around the boarding schools, for example. So even though I don't unfortunately know specifics, I would really, I highly imagine that there's peacemaking happening there, because there's just a lot of overlap and even cross kind of you know, communication and connection between you know, certain Native American tribes and Canadian tribes, given certain borders that, you know, we're more fluid along the Canadian, you know, borders and boundaries and U.S. boundaries. There's kind of, in history, there was more intersection and more transparency, I guess, between some of the Canadian tribes and the U.S. tribes, ancestrally, culturally. So I think that it would be something to really look into, especially, I mean, in Canada, just because they're so close to us and there's this historical overlap with some of the tribal communities. And it's something, I mean, I need to, you know, read up on that, because it's a really good question, what's going on, you know, more throughout the world. Yes, do you know some about that? Mm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You know, step by step, hopefully. I mean, I am optimistic that, again, Native Americans, I think, are coming more to the forefront. I mean, we see it in, you know, in the news with, or at least recently I remember seeing something about the whole issues with fires breaking out in California and stuff, and in the West, you know, that there's some engagement with Native American tribes around that, because they have a lot of amazing traditional environmental knowledge of how to prevent these fires. You know, they do a lot of preemptive kind of work, you know, to prevent stuff like that. So I don't know, I feel some optimism about it. I mean, there's a ways to go, certainly, but you know, there's right now, I think there's 574 federally recognized tribes around the country. You know, that's a large amount of tribes that exist, and they are federally recognized, you know, so they have that status, because there are tribes that are trying to get federal recognition, which allows them more rights and as they discussed in the documentary. And the more, I think, economic power these tribes have, you know, let's face it, you know, you need that financial backing to have influence and to take care of your own people, and to look, to influence things other than basic survival. You know, if you're able to have that behind you, you know, and you're not worrying about, you know, feeding your people, or, you know, extreme poverty, where, you know, you probably, how did you experience that? Because that, of course, keeps you at a certain level. You can't really think about necessarily about higher things. I mean, you know, social and political activism it's harder to do when you are struggling to survive and feed yourself, and, you know, you don't have any electricity in the community, or your water system is a mess. I don't know, did you have any personal experience with that, or thoughts on that? Yeah. Because you were working with a tribe that is experiencing a lot of poverty, right? Yeah. See, the tribes in Michigan, the 12 that I've dealt with, are in a very different place. I mean, I don't know all their financial ins and outs, but I mean, they obviously are kind of in the upper crust of being able to care for themselves financially. You know, there's a lot of poverty in Indian country still. I mean, even with casinos. I mean, not everybody, you know, if you're out in you know, the desert, you know, a casino, you know, is not going to help you. I mean, even if you can get the money to, you know, to do it. I mean, location, it's business. You know what I mean? You just because you can have a casino doesn't mean it's going to succeed, or you're going to be able to get, you know, raise the funding for it. There's all kinds of things that actually go into that. But anyway, were you going to say something?
Well, currently I do a lot of charities.
Oh, okay.
Quite a few people. And I visited the Rose Club and
Okay. Yeah.
absolutely incredible. And as for the court system, the actual people that are there that I talk to, that I trust them, that I
Yeah.
love them, and the programs they're supposed to have there, that they have. And I think there's a lot of graft
Mm-hmm.
and fraud.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they're sovereign.
Yeah, sovereign, yep.
So unless somebody there asks the state or the government to come in, nobody can do anything. And I don't know if people remember Wounded Knee. I do. That happened in the 70s. And it's still a hot topic. Very hot.
What do they tell you about, what do they say about it? What do they say about it when you're talking to tribal members?
Well, they want healthy release.
Yes.
That's number one. And number two, what they tried to, the objective there is to actually take the tribal leader out. Didn't happen.
Yeah.
And he was very effective.
Right.
Very effective. He studied it. But, no, Michigan was a great place. And you're right, it's location. And plus Michigan, well, most of the counties are very good.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a few counties that are really not that good. They're not really, they're called to do things. But, that's, you wouldn't know if you were there. You could travel for everywhere. There's probably the same trading posts that were created years ago, the same families control this. It's
Yeah.
amazing. There's no Aldi's, Wendy's,
Right.
McDonald's, there's nothing. There's
Lots of food deserts and,
obviously they're cheap, and
right.
in the few cities that they have, they're really poor.
It's devastating. I mean, I think that, I mean, Michigan, you know, these 12 tribes here are, you know, are doing so well. You know, and that doesn't mean they don't struggle or they don't have to, you know, casinos aren't doing as well as they used to when they first came out, and they have to expand. They have to get into other businesses. And just like any business people, I mean, you've got to, you know, there's no guarantee, and you have to, you know, you have to be creative, you have to think, you know, there's all kinds of things. I mean, right. Well, you know, Right. Well, you know, what's interesting is I know that when you know, various tribal chair people that I spoke to talk about how, you know, in some of the tribal communities here in Michigan, they are the biggest employers in the communities. They, you know, I've heard about the tribes giving out, I can't remember if it's called 1% or 2%. They have a program that they have to give out a certain percentage of monies to the community. And so it's interesting to see that change in position and control and power. And but again, you know, there's a lot of poverty in Indian country. You know what I mean? We kind of, you know, me presenting about Michigan, it's you know, it's not everywhere, you know, but thank goodness that is here, that's encouraging, and that you know, they're able to help other tribes too that are trying to start different court systems. And but it's fascinating to hear about your two experiences, and I'm glad you spoke about it, because it's important to hear the variation. I mean, there's such variation throughout the country. Mm-hmm.
It's so
Yeah.
good. And then as far as the documentary goes, like that started with when they were referencing the 70s, I think teens stuff, a lot of that
Right.
was like here in that standoff that had with the federal government, and they took it all the way to the United Nations, and it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, the Native American Indian movement that was happening then, yeah.
Change because of it, but then there's a lot of things that, but there were many things that changed, because up until that time, it was so pathetic
Yeah.
all over, even in Michigan.
Right. Oh, yeah. The poverty and all, it was very different. Yes, exactly. It's important to state that since the 70s and 80s, it's in Michigan at least, that it's changed a lot and for the better. Oh, is that where he is incarcerated? Yeah. Gosh, how old is he now? I mean, he must be very old. I mean, 80s, 90s, I don't know. But yeah, that's a big issue still.
According to the people on the reservation, he didn't do anything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, thank you all. Thank you for your wonderful questions and being here tonight.